In this video, I'm going to demonstrate 3 ways that you can use to join your work in the round when you're casting on for a circular project. I have simply cast on the number of stitches required to fit around this length of circular needle, but you can cast on any number of stitches that will fit around your needle that you want to be working with. To begin, we'll start with a very simple method, casting on and joining in the round. To do this, what you're going to need to do once you've cast on your final stitch and you've brought your needle tips together is grab your stitch marker, and I personally think the cuter the marker, the better. Place it on your right hand needle, and you can simply begin knitting in the round. This first stitch that you create will join your work in the round, and now you can knit around and around and around using your stitch marker as the indication of the beginning of round. Now, what a lot of people experience when they use this method is they'll get kind of a lengthening of that joining yarn. You'll get this longer stitch here that you don't necessarily like. So I'm going to show you 2 alternatives that should join your work in the round a little more cleanly so that when you're weaving in ends, you have less cleanup work to do. Both of the following methods will have you cast on an additional stitch so that you can decrease out a stitch as you join your work in the round. This first method of the 2 that I'm going to show you, I find a little bit easier. There's less manipulation of the stitches, but either work. So if your pattern has you cast on, just for example, 80 stitches, you're going to want to cast on 81 stitches and bring your needle tips together just like you were going to join in the round as in my first example. So to begin, you're going to start by slipping the very first stitch you cast on purlwise to your right hand needle so that it's right next to the last stitch you cast on. And now you're going to place your stitch marker right on the right hand needle, so it sort of traps those 2 stitches together, your first and last stitch cast on, and now you can work in the round all the way to the end of the round. You're going to come all the way to 2 stitches before the marker that you placed. So the stitches that are now unworked are the last stitch you cast on and the first stitch that you cast on, which was moved to the right hand needle before you placed the marker. Now you're simply going to knit these 2 stitches together like a K2 tog or a knit 2 together, and you've now decreased out that extra stitch. You can slip your marker to your right hand needle and continue knitting in the round. You don't really have a jog that you have to deal with at your beginning of round, so weaving in your ends is nice and tidy. This third method of joining in the round is very similar to the second method I described insofar as we're going to be casting on an extra stitch. So if your pattern tells you to cast on 80 stitches, you're going to cast on 81 stitches before you do this. However, rather than working all the way to the end of the round to decrease out the extra stitch, we're going to do it right at the beginning. So to begin, you're going to cast on, bring your needle tips together, and we're going to start similarly where we're going to slip this first stitch that you cast on purlwise to the right hand needle. And then rather than placing the marker immediately, we're going to reach past that stitch that we just slipped with our left hand needle, pick up the last stitch you just cast on, and lift it up and over. So you've decreased out that extra stitch. And I find this always gets a little loosey-goosey, so I'm just going to pull that snug. Now the first stitch that you cast on is on your right hand needle. The last stitch you cast on has been dropped off, and you can place your marker and start joining in the round right from here. Again, it's very nice and tidy. There's not a lot to clean up. A lot to clean up when you get to the end of the round. Or pardon me, when you get to the end of the project and need to weave in your ends. Here's a little bonus content for those of you who are working in the round using the magic loop method. So we've cast on all of our stitches and have divided them over our 2 needle tips, but the work is not yet joined. To join in the round, you're going to pull out that back needle, get a nice long loop, And to begin, you're going to start simply by inserting your needle into that first stitch on the front needle and joining and knitting across. But what happens in a lot of cases is people end up with a really long joining thread at that beginning of round. So I've come up with a little tip to help me keep my needle tips together when I'm joining in the round, so I don't get quite as long a joining tail. And the little trick is one of these tiny little claw clips. So what I do is I clip the cable that is holding all of the back stitches to the front needle so they stay nice and close together so they can't pull apart. And now when you bring your needle back around to insert into that front stitch, your cable isn't trying to pull apart. So you can knit your first couple of stitches, the join will be nice and tight, and then once you've knit sort of 3 or 4 stitches, or I guess when you get close to that little claw clip, you can remove it, your cable can do what it needs to do, but you've got a nice tight join at your beginning of round. Happy knitting!